Welcome to episode 169 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode today is brought to you by our friends at PSCU, the nation's premier payments CUSO and an integrated financial technology solutions provider. Visit PSCU.com to learn more and to discover PSCUTV, a new thought leadership platform hosted by a good friend of ours and PSCU's Chief Growth Officer, Brian Scott. Each episode explores top-of-mind insights in the credit union industry. I have watched quite a few, and they're good ones, so make sure to check that out. On today's show, let's just get right into it. We're going to flip the script a little bit, and I'm going to be turning the show over to a guest host. She happens to be my human, my partner in life, and as regular listeners know, a favorite guest of mine on the show. I am biased. Jill Nowacki, President and CEO of Humanidei. Jill, take it away. Who's your guest on the show today?
Well, thank you, Randall. Of course, my guest on the show is the one and only Randy Smith, and I'm going to jump right into it. Randy, it has been almost 4 years. It's been almost 4 years since the last time we flipped the script, and I got to put you in the hot seat with some of these deep digging questions. I'm very excited to have the chance to be back to here with you today on this side of the microphone. And so let's just check in with a quick update, though. What's new since December of 2019? Anything happened since then?
This is our fifth year of the show. So a little bit. First thing that comes to mind is I have to wear reading glasses now. So I can no longer see my dive computer and actually need goggles that are. But besides that, seriously, I'm older. I feel like I have more time and space now since you helped us find Lauren. That's been quite some time now too. And she's done a fantastic job of, as I like to say, making me more and more irrelevant, but she still lets me to have this much fun on the podcast. So I would say that is being able to think more strategically, have fun doing this podcast, and having to wear reading glasses. That's probably what's new and exciting with me in the last few years.
All right. So with all these changes, and that I would never say you're irrelevant, just for the record on that. But as you've continued,
there is a reason that you're the one hosting this, because I figure if anybody knows me, you know me better than anybody else in this world, including myself, probably. So why
dig a little deeper on some of those questions.
That's right.
So in this new life you have, where you have moved into a more strategic role or stepped away maybe a little bit more, there's a question I know that some of your close followers are curious about, because it's a question that our friend and previous podcast guest, Brian Schools, actually once asked me. And that's, what does a typical day look like for Randy these days?
Well, first of all, you are a natural host because you're dropping past episodes. So now we can link back to Brian's episode and people can give that a listen as well. What does a typical day look like for me? I am a creature of habit, and I work, and I'm at my best when I have a bit of a routine in the morning. So mornings have always been my, just where I'm the most productive. I think the most. I mean, that's been the case quite honestly, since the first job that I had out of college, where I like to get in early and I'm pretty much useless by the afternoon. So it's one of those things you live and learn. So typical day for me, when I'm at my best, it's to wake up, journal, meditate, maybe listen to an audiobook when I have to get back to it. But when we were training for Kilimanjaro, it was working out or going for a run and doing something physical. I know I've mentioned it on the podcast before, and when Leo Ardeen was on the second time, see, look at that, dropping names. That idea of shutting off all the notifications. So I don't look at emails before 10 o'clock in the morning, probably. I don't look at podcast stats. It's all, that from what I would say is 6 to 10 in the morning is all where I'm able to focus a lot more. And then from there, who knows? I mean, it depends on the day, really, to be honest with you. I mean, you probably know better than I do on that. So, but another thing I was thinking about because I knew you were going to ask me this, was so often it's something that you pointed out to me before, when something interests me, I really dig into it. So having a lot more time to dig into random stuff, that kind of in a weird way, that fires up my creativity. And like, I know from conversations with Lauren, she loves when I have space, because then I come to her with all kinds of big picture, big thinking ideas. And a lot of the times that just comes from when my mind is free to roam. So
yeah.
What do you think I do all day, Jill? You see me.
You have a nice slow start until about 10 a.m. And then, from 10 to 2, you might do a little email checking or something. And then about 2 o'clock is time for the afternoon exercise or activity. And
go for the walk, do something, right?
And then, 5 o'clock, and it's time to start thinking about dinner or the next steps. And but obviously you do. Go ahead.
I would also say it also really depends where I am too. As people that listen to the show know, I love to travel. So if I am somewhere out exploring this beautiful world, it tends to be walking around is what I'm doing most of the time. So,
so what I will say is consistent, or maybe a common thread, whether you're somewhere else or you're at home, and what you reference, that idea of like, you do like to kind of go down those rabbit holes. I would probably classify them as something more like a focus on continuous learning rather than going down a rabbit hole. And of course, I have a front row seat to that. But why don't you tell your listeners a little bit more about this? How is it that you do like to learn, and why is it important to you to keep on learning?
Oh, I think I'm a curious person. I'll start with that. So that idea, like, that we ever know everything or about anything is, like, quite honestly, is just not something I believe in. And I tend to be like, I truly do believe that we can really learn from anybody in any kind of environment and things like that. So from a learning perspective, I mean, really, it's what gets my interest in the moment. That can change so often. I mean, that is, if I think back, if we think back to 5 years ago, before the first season of the podcast, there were many nights I didn't come to bed as I was watching YouTube videos and digging into stuff to try to figure out the podcast. Once I figured out enough, that was enough for me. I probably haven't watched another video since then. And that's why the podcast hasn't really changed that much. It's still the same technology that I used that day. I mean, I remember when I came back from Africa the last time, hanging out with our friends at Akaska, all you heard me talking about was the climate and solar and what the SACOs were doing over there, and just this amazing work, and like digging into that to see more. And then this summer I was looking at philosophy and stoicism more. And I mean, you hear me jump over where I'm like, I might want to be a dive master. So, what that is and where I get that information, I would say is a little bit about, like, I try to dig into many different sources. So whether it's listening to audiobooks or reading books, or I read a ton of news, I am not only owning a news site, I also absolutely love news. So, and digging into long form journalism, things like that. I think that's all part of, like, constantly learning. My curiosity always seems to be there. And to me, one of the things that it always amazes me is, like, when I'm really digging into things, whether they're about work or life or whatever it happens to be, how much, like, once my mind is flowing that way, I have a lot more ideas. So, that's where, when I start to think of, like, from a strategic standpoint, what does digital media look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever it happens to be? What does learning and education and how do we communicate? All of that comes from the most, like, a lot of the times I'm like, start going down rabbit holes there from other things that I have going on, or from other things that I am exposed to. So for me, I think it's just a constant where it all does come full circle. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Natural curiosity sort of stirs your creativity and leads to things that motivate you. Then when you the more you dig into it, it's a bit of a cycle. It sounds like
it tends to be. It also, I fully admit, I have a monkey mind that bounces all over the place. So you never know what I'm digging into or thinking about.
As often indicated by the plane tickets that might show up in my Delta app when you got curious about a new place, for example. So you've regularly been asking your guests this next question.
Uh-oh.
And because of that, we know that Warren Buffett has often said that Dale Carnegie training was the best investment that he made in himself. What's the best investment you've made in you?
I've struggled with this question all year, and I've been so impressed with the folks on the show on how quickly, I mean, this isn't editing, folks. I mean, most of them come up instantly with that answer of what theirs is. And for me, I think I've thought about it, but I really didn't think about it until I knew you were going to ask me this. And the one thing that I kept coming back to, and it's going to sound so funny, I think, out there, because it's a book, and it's not the entire book. It's one small part of the book that totally refocused the way that I looked at so many things. And it was The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss years ago. And people ask me if I think they should still read that book, because I mention it to people fairly often. It's kind of dated. I've went back to it, but there was this one section, and I remember you went through this kind of exercise because I recommended it to you before you were starting Humanidei, was like actually breaking down what you need to live. And that to me, I think, changed my entire life. It is not a budget, right? It is not. It's to live the life you want to live. What do you need? Put a dollar amount on it. And if you get to that point, or if you are at that point already, to me, it allowed me to start making other decisions. And I remember when I went through it, it was actually like, I know I can live the life that I want to live today, if these basic things line up, for the most part. It's not. So, gosh, I bet that's 7-8 years ago now, where I really I looked at that and it completely changed the way I look at things. I'm trying to think of where I heard this, but this idea of, what's your goal? Is your goal status? Is your goal freedom? What is your goal? Like so many people that talk to me ask about, they're like, oh, I wish I had, that freedom type thing. Well, if freedom's your goal, then it's not winning the next award or getting the next promotion or getting whatever it happens to be, right? But if it's status, it might be, and they're not wrong, right? But understanding what that is. So, I mean, if anybody has questions on that exercise, I could send it the exact page or the worksheet. But you can email me or find me. But it was such a fascinating thing. And like I said, it is not a budget. It's not about how to save money. It's not about any of that. But it's really taking a look at how much money do I need to maintain or live the life that I want to live. And for me, it was just a wake-up call, quite honestly.
Yeah. Despite the fact that I know you said it's not your budget, yeah. I think there's a common saying out there, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but it's the idea of, if you show me your budget, I'll show you your values.
Yeah.
And I think that goes either way. And so what you're talking about there, if, we talk about the idea of if you really value freedom, then you have to make some choices that really do prioritize those values in that idea too. And that if you value recognition,
yep,
there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to know which one you value more. So I understand what you're saying. I love that
you use the word choices so much, because I've heard more than not sacrifice is the word that people use. And so, I've had conversations with people that have said, oh, I'd love your life or whatever happens to be. And I'm like, but would you, you've chose to go to soccer, have a bigger house, do whatever it happens to be. Those are not sacrifices for me. That's not things that you know what I mean? That wasn't my desire. Sacrifice to me would be giving up some of the things that I love to do. But there's nothing about me that thinks my life's right for everybody. There's nothing about me that thinks anybody else's life is right for me either, though. So there's this quote, and I wanted to throw this out there because I think it fits in here kind of so well. And it's something, it's another one of these, I don't know where I picked it up. And I think the one that's credited of saying this is Confucius, but it's this idea that we have two lives, and the second begins when we realize we only have one. So for me, that's, man, I love my life. So everything I do, going back to that budget or knowing what that is, if something where it was very eye-opening to me was, it also helped me make decisions on the no side too, where I know that other things don't light me up the same way, right? So anyways, I won't get too far ahead of myself. I can talk about that forever. So, yeah.
But it does jump me into a future question I had, and I'll just move around a little bit so that we follow a sort of regular thread here. Not too long ago, we did record a podcast episode that your team entitled Yes or No. And so let's talk more about that. Don't stop on that. Go down that path a little more about knowing what to say yes or no to. What's the vetting process or the gut check you do to make the determination of what you commit to?
I wish I had a clear answer on this, quite honestly, but it's still trial and error. I mean, I still say yes to things that then afterwards I'm like, why did I say yes to that? Where it should have been a no, and I think that becoming more clear, taking more time. I think today I take a lot more time. I've always been fairly impulsive on things. So like if someone asks of something of my time, sometimes I might just say no. But if it's not a clear no for me, I no longer tend to have clear yeses until I like truly think through the yes. And does it align with the life that I'm trying to live? For me, a huge motivator, if you want to say, or a value, I guess is probably a better word than motivator, but is freedom. Like I like an open calendar. I think as we talked about it on the Yes or No podcast, I love an open calendar. It always gets filled in. So if I look at something and I'm like, 3 months from now, am I still going to want to do that? There have been so many, I would say, what I would call wrong turns that have made me wiser. And I love the term wrong turn, to tell you the truth, because you and I just got back from Santiago, Chile. And like we walked a lot. And sometimes we went down a street that we wasn't on our Google map. And all of a sudden you see something amazing, right? But at first it may have just added time to where we were going or got us lost. To me, that's been the same thing. There's so many individual examples that keep popping into my head where it's like something that I was like in the moment, yes. By the time it came around, I'm like, I have to stop doing X to now go do Y, and I'd rather still be doing X. And to go back to that idea of almost creating like that baseline, and I know it's not all about finances, but we all have commitments and responsibility and, things like that. And a lot of the times it costs money to do some of the stuff we want to do, like for me, buy plane tickets, but where it's helped me on the no side of that is, I can think back to during the pandemic when we couldn't travel, there were way too many Amazon boxes coming to our house. Most of that was from me. Most of that I'm now trying to give up. It's been going to the Goodwill and stuff, right? Like, it's just like, that's not accumulation of stuff is not a core value of mine, right? So it's like that idea of even in those moments, taking a look at something and saying, do I want this really? And career-wise, is this something that I really want to do, or does it just feel good because somebody's asking me to do it? And if it's the other, that doesn't fit into knowing myself. Doesn't mean it's not right for somebody else, right? Could be somebody else out there who's really excited to go do it. So that's a better person to go do it anyways than me. So
one of the things you just said was that when you say yes to something, if it's going to be, 3 months or more out, hey, am I still going to want to do this 3 months from now? You're 5 seasons into the podcast, so way more than 3 months.
Yeah.
Why is this something that's kept you focused, kept you motivated? Why are you still doing the podcast?
I'm still having a ton of fun. I love being the one asking the questions. So this is uncomfortable for me.
You're doing just fine.
You talk about things I say no to when people ask me to be on their podcast most of the time. I say no. It's just like, I like to be the one asking the questions. So the reason I'm on this one is I was too busy living life and forgot to schedule a guest. So Jill's bailing me out here she was like, let's talk to you. So, but the good news is when I was trying to find somebody.
I think he's a fascinating guest, though.
I've got great people now coming up for the next 2 months, though, because none of them, everybody holiday week, nobody could record, right? Like, so, but anyways, wait, can you ask me the question again?
Just
look at there. There's the squirrels, right?
Kind of 5 seasons into the podcast. Why are you still doing the podcast? And maybe even a follow-up, are you inspired to try anything different with it?
So yes. And I'm still I am having such a blast having the conversations. The podcast, if it was going along like it was the first few years, like I had such a blast when I started it. And I committed to 6 episodes. That was it, right? And this is 169. So as long as people are still listening and digging it, then for now, I'm still having a blast doing it. The changes of it, there was a point where it started to feel stale to me, and I had to kind of pivot. And a lot of it was pivoting back to what I loved about it in the beginning. As it grew, I mean, the first time I was on this show, we probably had less than 50,000 downloads. Now we have 350,000 downloads, right? It's just a lot more people listening today than they did 4 years ago, 5 years ago. But it still has to be fun for me. I still have to be engaged. I still have to be having the conversations that I think and hope that people are enjoying. And so far, that's been the case. Looking at new stuff, constantly. I have 2 different Evernotes that are ideas for ways to still keep the what I would say is the integrity of the podcast, which is talking to just amazing credit union friends, the smart people in our space who have so much to share. And it's one of the things that makes credit unions so beautiful is people are actually willing to share. I don't think a lot of other industries have that. And there's still so many more people that not only that I'd like to have on the show, but there's so many more who were on the show 5 years ago that I'd love to have conversations with again. Life keeps moving forward, right? Like different phases of careers, we've all been through a lot in 5 years. I remember 5 years ago was pre-pandemic even. So, life has changed. And so for me, I think that's what keeps me motivated. I also like round numbers, and I'd like to get to 200 episodes too. So, after that, who knows? I tend to keep lists and track things. Imagine that.
So no commitment that episode 200 is a season finale or a series finale.
I don't know. But I'm looking forward towards, I have some great guests lined up for the rest of this year already. Like I said, I have some notes on, maybe sprucing up the podcast for next year, which I'm excited about too, to start year 6 of it. So yeah, it's as of right now, this is still a yes for me. I guess if it started to become a no, maybe I'd just say, hey, anybody want a guest host for a little while and give me a breather? But as of now, it's still a yes. So.
Excellent. So before you go about refreshing some of those podcast questions, I'm gonna pull out some of your key catchphrases that we've heard in the first 5 seasons and dig a little bit into some different areas. So one of your catchphrases might be, "Here's a scratch my own itch question." I hear that one out of you a lot on this. So I don't want to miss the chance to turn this table on you. So Randall, help me scratch my own itch with this question.
Okay.
In the work I do, I'm often approached by people who want help figuring out their next step professionally. So they know it's time for a career move, but they don't necessarily know what. And they come to me and say, I'm just ready for something different. I don't know if I want to be a CEO. I don't know if I want this or that. And I'm pretty good at asking them the questions, but I can't give them their answers to this. It's so individualized when somebody's wondering, what is the next thing I should do? But when it comes to your journey and the steps you've made, did you always have those answers?
Oh, God, no. And I still don't. That's the honest question, right? It's constantly asking more questions. So
when you have had those times when you've had to really reevaluate where you stand, what you're working on, and figure out what it is you really want, what's the process in those situations? So flexibility matters to you, freedom matters to you, but how did you get to the point where you were able to say, that's what matters? And maybe with those wrong turns you referenced earlier, what have you learned about how to approach the changes when you felt compelled to make them?
So that's a fun itch to scratch there. And I'll be honest, this is something that you and I've talked quite a bit about, right? Because it's been such an interesting thing, I think, over the past few years. And another part of this may just be age too. I recently turned 49. And it seems like a lot of the folks around me are looking at life. I don't know if we call that a midlife crisis or what we call that, but it's like they're looking at professionally, they're looking at that kind of the last leg of the race. What do they want to do for the next decade or so? And what's important to them there? A lot of our friends' kids are growing up, right? And so there's this other independence. So people are starting to think about things, but I think no matter where you are in your career or life, I wouldn't separate the two things whatsoever. I start with asking myself a lot of questions. So for me, my journaling practice in the morning is just it's not meant for anyone else to read. There's generally not any answers. A lot of the times it's just asking questions. And as I ask questions, I start to dig further. One of the things that I think about all the time is, it's that idea of what's the goal? What are you looking for? If somebody's calling you up and they're asking I know I want something different. Well, what are you looking to do? I want more flexibility. I think that often the next question is, okay, so what would so what would you like to do that gives you more flexibility? My question is, why? Why do you want more flexibility? And it's that idea, I'm going to be honest, the guy's very smart. He's written a ton of good books. Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I don't think that's the last question. Even when you find the why, ask it again. And if you start to get down to what that why is, still not done. What's the first step you can take? Because to me, that's when I'm digging into things and when I'm looking at myself, whether it's professionally or, personally, as I'm starting to answer some of these questions, it's not oh, cool, I got it. What am I going to do next? And that doesn't have to be quit my job, move to Bali, like whatever it happens to be, that's like, okay, but what steps can I take today that move me one step towards that? Because this sounds really cliche, but like life is made up of a bunch of little steps, right? When we stop, when we stand still, when we get complacent, that's a word that makes my skin crawl. And when I say complacent there, that's in people that are expressing that they're maybe unhappy or unfulfilled in a situation. If you stay in it, then you're complacent to it. And that to me is what I would say to anybody is like, what's the one step you can make? If you want more flexibility, is the current path you're going on in your career aligned to be more flexible? Or if you succeed, will you actually become less flexible, right? Like, will you have more daily responsibilities? Well, then the two aren't aligning. So no matter how successful you are, in my mind, you're never going to feel fulfilled. On the other hand, if you're looking for a bunch of flexibility, but you're watching your friends get national awards or CEO jobs or whatever, and you're like, oh, I could do that, then again, you're not really aligning yourself as far as I'm concerned. So, I think you're a much better person to ask this question to. This is something that you and I talk about a lot, and we both, you get it professionally. I think I get it more almost socially, where people say to me, like, they call you when they're like, what steps do I take to do next? They tend to talk to me when they're just like, I want to do something. How did you do this? Or whatever it happens to be. And I think in the past, I may have been more willing to give tips and advice and things like that. But as I've moved further along this process, it is that idea that you got to know what works for you, because what works for you and what works for me and like what lights me up and what lights you up are completely different things. And that to me is the important part that you and I can answer for somebody, like, is to dig in deeper, ask the tough questions. You don't have to have answers today. Ask it again tomorrow. You
made a comment when you were talking about that idea of figure out that next step, just take the next step. And you said it sounds cliche. I would say, I don't think it sounds cliche, but what it does sound is very simple. So this idea of somebody coming to you and saying, well, I want to do what you do. And it's like, well, okay, figure out what that one next step is. I feel like sometimes that could potentially be met with a little bit of resistance of that. Well, you don't understand.
Absolutely.
In my world, why that doesn't work, for example.
Absolutely. And I hear that all the time too, right? But I think it actually proves the point even more, right? Like there's two things, as you were saying, that were really popping into my head. One was this idea that just because we take a step in a direction doesn't mean we have to do it forever. Like, if you think back to, like, I can just give, for me, over the past 15 years as an example, right? 15 years ago, when Dave and I started CUInsight, I loved working 80 hours a week and putting everything I could into building this. It was what lit me up. There was nothing else, that was it. I was having so much fun. It was that, like, didn't feel like work at all. It was so much fun to be building something. When it became more managing something, it wasn't lighting me up as much anymore, right? So it took me a while. It wasn't like overnight I pivoted, but I did start to make steps to that pivot. That can all pivot again. Who knows what happens tomorrow? So that's the one thing I would say about taking the steps. You take the steps. If they don't feel good, turn back. Take another pivot. You know what I mean? Like nothing is permanent when it comes to like moving in a direction or testing the waters. And that's I think something that I did say earlier was like, you don't have to quit to move closer to what your value alignment is. But as you dig more into that, do you start to understand what to say yes to and what to say no to? I mean, that's one thing. I think there was something else too, but I don't remember.
I can get cliched now and say it does. There is that like, and maybe it's not a cliche as much as a mantra or potentially a meme, but that idea of like headlights are only going to help you see like 30 feet, but it's enough to get you 1,000 miles into a journey. So that idea of just take that one step and then look around and say, do I still want to keep going down this road?
Or do you want to take a right or a left? I mean, like, I absolutely love that. I think about when you stop and you think, and, this is going to sound terrible, but I really do think most of my life has been sunshine and rainbows with just a few shit shows thrown in from time to time that those are the parts where I start to learn. There have been times in my life that I've felt failure, you know what I mean? Like, and a lot of failure, but nothing, like when I look back now, that was just one portion of life. Like, and I'm not special there. We've all experienced hurt, heartbreak, failure, whatever it happens to be, setbacks along the way, but they're setbacks. And at some point we had to move forward then. And I think one of the things that maybe I've learned as I've gotten older is to be proactive in that movement forward. So even if things are going great, this is like one step forward, right? Like, let's just keep testing and trying to get closer to, I keep saying what lights us up. I completely got that from you. But that idea of like what lights us up, keep moving towards it, knowing that it may change. It can, and that's not bad. The idea that I heard you say like that sounds like it's, somebody might push back and say it's, not that you're making it sound too simple. Yeah, taking one step is simple. That's not a tough step. It's one step. It's not, to use your analogy, the 1,000 miles. You're not looking 1,000 miles out. You're looking one step. If you're creating everything that could happen over the next 1,000 miles, you're taking way more than one step in your mind, even though you haven't taken one step with your feet, right? Like, so I don't know. That's me waxing, not poetically.
Maybe you don't think it's poetic, but I think it's that beautiful idea of like making that intentional choice every day. Like, is this still where I want to be today? Do I want to take one more step further for it today? Do I want to keep moving down this path? Or if there is that point.
This is one of these goofy like things that I heard someplace, probably on a podcast or audiobook, and I really should have Googled it at some point over the past 6 months, but it's been a constant in my journaling and in my mind, right? And it's this idea that urgent and important aren't synonyms, right? So what's important, not what's urgent, right? Like what's important. And I think that's the small steps is, are you taking steps towards what's important? Often we take steps to what's urgent, and urgent might just be what's in front of us. So is that email urgent? We work in credit unions. No one's going to die. But what's important? And like, and I think that's something even just in leadership. What is important that you as a leader in your credit union should be working on? And what's urgent? They're different, right? So anyways.
All right. Well, on that, let's move from these hard-hitting questions. You survived them. And now it's some time to just have some fun. So as you always say, these are the rapid fire questions. And remember, the questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. Are you ready?
I feel like I should be, since I've asked most of these to everybody, I'm sure. But yeah, I never answer them myself.
I don't even think I spiced them up at all. I think I stuck to the script on this one. So Randy, what was the first job you ever had?
I was a busboy after I turned 14 years old, and it lasted for exactly 4 hours. And I called my mom and told her that she had to come pick me up. And she said, no, I had to stick out my shift. And I said, then I'll walk home. So that was it. I ended up going on to work all through high school, but that was my only foray in the service industry.
Wait, I might recommend you leave that role off your resume.
Sad.
Professional advice from a recruiter here.
Yeah.
All right, Randy, when was the last time you were amazed, either personally or professionally?
See, that's, again, I'm going to say, the beauty of journaling is I'm constantly doing this gratitude thing. And it was just yesterday. So we just did an overnight flight, and we're recording this podcast now, but we were in Santiago, Chile. And we took a day trip to the Casablanca Valley to do some wine tasting with a nice group of people from all over. It was amazing. And the vineyards, the people that worked there kept telling us about the reason that valley was so good was because to grow white wines was because from the ocean air, the ocean was right over like a hill, a little mountain range, a fog would roll in every morning. And that basically was great for the growing of the white wine, but it was terrible for red wines in that valley. And that was cool. We just listened, whatever, go on with the day. And then the next day, you and I were just going to go do some exploring, go see some street art in another city. And we came over the mountain, and you could see the sheet of clouds, the fog, all over the vineyards that weren't covered. And we were high enough coming over that mountain that we could see above it too. So you could almost see it moving up the valley. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Exactly what they told us would happen.
I'm like, but we're watching it today. Like we didn't see it the day before. So I find this world amazing and the people in it. But that amazed me recently. So
that was beautiful. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
It must have been a marketer of some sort, but it was an advertisement in the Atlanta airport getting on the SkyTrain, and it just said, book the ticket.
That's great.
And I'm like, that's right. Don't worry about what you're going to do once you get there or even where you're going. Just book the ticket. Go someplace.
You have previously mentioned that you are rather prone to advertising. Is there anything you are unreasonably cheap or thrifty about?
Oh, I think you should answer this more than anything. Let's see. I'm bigger, so I like to pay for comfort in planes, but I really don't care about the hotel. So that's why you tend to book the hotels and I buy the airfare. I know recently you said I felt like I guilted you into not getting the better eggs because they were so expensive. So I find grocery shopping to be like a game, looking at what's on sale and stuff like that. And it's something I actually enjoy. But yeah, I mean, $7.99 for a dozen eggs was ridiculous. Come on. So, anyways, so maybe eggs. I think I'm cheap on eggs. Do you have any to add on this one?
You just reminded me that we were shopping for groceries and I wanted to get a frozen pizza and you told me not to recently too because you thought it would just be too much. And I was like, we can get the $6 frozen pizza too.
There was probably one on sale for like $2.99. So, no.
So yeah, I guess you do kind of, as much as you love the grocery store, they do pop out sometimes on that. So I'm sure you've shared your opinion with other guests you've had on, but what is the greatest album of all time according to you?
Oh, that hasn't changed since the first time. It's still Appetite for Destruction, Guns N' Roses.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is a question I did not previously have the chance to ask you because it came from our friend and CUA Chairman Harper. And the question is, who plays you in the movie or biopic of your life?
Oh, geez. See, I wouldn't have added this if I thought it was ever going to come back to me. I mean, any 49-year-old guy is going to wish they could say something like George Clooney or Brad Pitt. But I don't know. Maybe Ben Affleck. Seems like he's all right. He's taller. For
the height alone.
I got it.
All right, Randy, what are you currently reading? And other than the 4-Hour Workweek, is there any book you think everyone should read?
And again, I'm not sure the 4-Hour Workweek is real relevant anymore. Maybe buy the audiobook or whatever, and I could tell you the section to go to. But a lot of it is dated because so much was based around technology, and quite honestly, it's an older book, right? Oh, what am I currently reading? I'm listening to The Daily Stoic, but I don't listen to it like just one passage a day because I have short attention span. So I tend to listen until something sticks with me and then I sit and think on it for a while. That's by Ryan Holiday. On my nightstand is a book by, and I don't remember their names, a couple of Japanese guys called the Courage to Be Disliked, which is all about finding your true self. I recently just finished for the second time. I listened to it or read it years ago, but The Art of War by Stephen Pressfield, that amazing book just about creativity. And then I've been on a philosophy kick. So I also just finished recently. It was a really short one, but an old book that's called What Does It All Mean by Thomas Nagel. That I listened to that just about a month ago when we were still down in the Caribbean. I was walking down the beach listening to that, asking those big questions. Beautiful thing.
Awesome. All right. What does the word success mean to you?
Oh, that's interesting. You took that version of it. I like it. All right. Let's see. What does the word success mean to me? When I see other people, that to me, it feels like or looks like that they're being that true best version of themselves where they seem happy, whether that's professionally or, it's so funny. As you say that, I'm thinking of like so many friends and acquaintances that we know from many different areas of life, and like seeing some who truly seem lit up with the career success that they've been having, or whether it's a new position or being appointed to a new board or something like that. And then I see others who are like had worked their whole lives and now are living a life that actually doing what they worked for, that type of a thing. And you're seeing them also just lit up. And, I mentioned that like earlier about needing readers for the scuba, the goggles, because I can't see my dive computer. But even like some of the folks that you meet that are like working in the dive industry, where it's just like their passion for the ocean and for the environment. And like, that's why they're doing what they're doing, and they take it seriously and they love showing other people at that's success. So to me, I think when I define success, it's all about that kind of internal feeling of like, are you, no need to be rich and miserable. Like that's just, get rid of the miserable. Like when things are rolling, life just doesn't seem that hard, and it can be easy. And that's, I think for me personally, it's when you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, what your true self is doing. And that to me is success when you figure that out. And it can take a long time. I'm still looking. So
well, what a great note to end on, that idea of being able to find that flow. So last though, of course, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share or an ask of your listeners?
If you made it this far, make sure to come back for the next episode when I'll have a credit union CEO on. That is the reason that you come here and not my rambling. No, this isn't like a new phase of the podcast where I just sit and talk all the time. My biggest ask always when it comes to the show is, I greatly appreciate everybody listening. If you could subscribe on, Apple iTunes, share the show. I absolutely love doing this, and I feel grateful and honored that I get the chance to, and that I'm the one who gets to have all these conversations with so many amazing people from around our movement. So, subscribe, share, listen again next week.
Well, thank you, Randy, for giving me the chance to come and play guest host for the day. Of course, I'm still going to let you have the final word and officially thanking the listeners and, of course, your sponsor and wrapping up the show now. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, my love, for doing this and humoring me and making it only slightly uncomfortable. I do prefer to be on the other side of the questions, that's for sure. We will link to everything that Jill and I talked today in the show notes. So again, thank you for playing me on the show. Just a few things before we go. As I mentioned to start, make sure to check out PSCU and learn more about PSCUTV. They are long time partners of CUInsight.com and the podcast. And I am grateful for their support to allow me to have this much fun, as you can tell, doing what I do. And my guess is our buddy Brian Scott is having a blast hosting PSCU TV too. So check that out over at PSCU.com. I mentioned subscribe to the podcast. If you're looking for the books that I mentioned or any of the past guests, quick Google search of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can have your next read on its way from Amazon. And as always, certainly, last but not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. You all rock. I appreciate you all so very much. Be well, friends.